Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and it's my honor to convene this daily program that brings people together from around the world. We're live on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Please share right now. Please tag your friends right now, so that they can watch this conversation live or later. On this show, we discuss three crises: the health, financial, and racial inequality crises. We're always looking for guests and theme suggestions. Today is episode 142. We've been live for 142 straight days, including weekends, holidays, every single day, as we bring you stories in and around this crisis. Please share this with your friends and family. We have a very special guest who will be joining us very soon. Mayor Sean Strub, AIDS activist, is the title of this episode, but it could have been a variety of things. Sean is on Twitter at Sean Strub. He's the mayor of Milford, Pennsylvania, the author of BodyCounts, a memoir of politics, sex, AIDS, and survival. He's the founder of Pause Mag, executive director of the Zero Project, and in 1990 became the first openly HIV plus candidate to run for federal office. He is going to teach us a lot tonight. Please tag and share it with your friends right now. Our co-host will be Jonathan Boorstein at Jonathan 1003, his zip code near Union Square in New York. He's a writer, wearer of wonderful hats, and a great friend of the show. He has watched 143 straight episodes, every single one. No one else has done that. Not my wife, not my kids, not my mom, not my dad, no one. I have barely watched all 142 episodes, but he has done just that. Please stay tuned to have our conversation with Jonathan and with Sean. They'll be with us in just a few minutes. Hi, everyone. I'm Sree Sreenivasan, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism. It is my honor to be with you here today. I'm also the co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, mobile, and virtual events consultancy. Our motto: don't cancel your in-person event, and don't even plan your virtual event without talking to us. You see my email address right there on the screen. Please email me and please write to me. We would love to talk to you. We'd love to advise you, collaborate with you. We can be 10% of your production team or 110% of your production team. And we'd love to work with you. Please get in touch. We've done projects for 50 people and events for 100,000 people, and we can work with you. We are so grateful to everyone who's been watching for the last 142 days. We've had people who've called this show a lifeline. We've had people who've said this show has been meaningful to them, that this show has been a support for them. And I say to all of you, this show is a lifeline for me. This show is a support line for me. I have gotten much more out of this show than anyone else. And I'm so grateful to all of you for being part of that story. The reason we've gotten all this ability to connect with people and learn is because of you all and because of our awesome producers. So I'm going to reveal today our new promo graphic that shows you something about our show, including our updated numbers. We've had, in the first 140 shows, 1 million plus viewers, 100 million social impressions, 260 guests, 148 of them have been women. We got to up that ratio even more. 53 cities where the guests came from, 15 countries, including the chief scientist of WHO. We've had 45 doctors, nurses, authors, journalists, CEOs, founders, teachers, professors. And you can find all our archives at youtube.com/Sreenet. youtube.com/SreeNet. We are so grateful to Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon on Twitter, and Rose Horowitz, Rose Horowitz 31. It is Rose's birthday, so she has the night off, but you can all wish her a happy birthday. She will read all the messages in a little, I'm sure, after she comes back after a wonderful night out. We're always looking for speaker suggestions, sponsors. Email us, sree@sree.net. You'll be meeting Sean Strub in just a few minutes. We're letting him get ready, get the lights right, get all his vitamins and get ready, get some coffee, some Friday night libations. Just as Jonathan is, so will Sean. He has a couple of minutes to do all that. And then we will meet him. Before we do, we have to thank our sponsors because our sponsors make it all possible. So we want to start by thanking the folks at Muckrack and the Muckrack Academy for bringing us together here. Muckrack Academy sponsors this show via the Fundamentals of Social Media course. It's a certification course that more than 4,000 people have taken, and you can too. Please check out mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. I think I have here one of the certificates that people have been putting online, Lauren Mack certificate, and you can see my signature and Greg's signature. I promise you that's the authentic signature. Actually, it's not, as you know. But please do sign up for the Muckrack Academy course, mrac.co/social. By the way, have you told us where you're watching from? Please tell us where you're watching from, what your questions are. We want to hear from you. We also want to thank our sponsors at Nunbelievable, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each box of handcrafted cookies provides 2 meals to those in need. 20% off with the code SREE. Nunbelievable, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Please go to nunbelievable.com and use the code SREE. We'd love for you to check it out. And we have 2 more sponsors to tell you about. Our show, She's on Call, which comes out on Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern. 2 surgeons, Dr. Sujana and Dr. Marina, and their guests, Dr. Benjamin Chang and Dr. Claudette Ladram, hand surgeon, orthopedics. And they will talk about everything from going back to school to fighting COVID to staying safe. Do not miss this show. Please follow along for sure. And now, our final sponsor, here they come.
Hotstar Premiere Nights. Watch the year's biggest blockbuster streaming straight to your screen, exclusively on Hotstar.
What if one day you find a bag full of cash and you're faced with a dilemma to take it or not? Would you take it? Watch Loot Case, premiering today and streaming now exclusively on Hotstar. Hashtag Hotstar Premiere Nights, Hotstar USA Promotions. Check it out at hotstar.com/US at Hotstar USA. All the movies they have there are subtitled, and you will see some of the hottest movies out of India on hotstar.com/US, and you'll want to check that out. Okay, enough sponsors. Let's get to the main show. We are today talking about all kinds of topics with a very important guest that we have today for you. He's going to join us in just a minute. Sean Strub is here, at Sean Strub. Please follow him. He's the mayor of Milford, Pennsylvania, the author of Bodycounts, a memoir of politics, sex, AIDS, and survival, founder of Pause Mag, executive director of Zero Project. In 1990, became the first openly HIV positive candidate to run for federal office. We will be meeting him in just a minute, along with his friend and our dear friend, Jonathan Boorstein. Let's bring them both on screen right now. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Hello.
Great to have you here. Thank you for being here. My first question always is, how are you and how are you doing with this crisis? I know we'll be talking to the mayor about a lot of aspects of this. I'll start with Jonathan. Jonathan has watched 142 straight episodes of the show. Jonathan's in Union Square. How are you doing, Jonathan?
I am doing fine. Union Square is still in one piece despite protests, police vans rounding up random protesters, and all sorts of other activities.
And so we are grateful to you for being here. You have watched every one of these episodes. We are very grateful to you, Jonathan. And I want you to tell us about Sean and why we felt this was the perfect time to bring him on. And we're so grateful that he's here.
Two basic reasons. First of all, Milford itself is almost a microcosm of everything that is going on in the cities around the United States. But because it is small, it is almost easier to grasp all the different currents. And this is something Sean will go into in greater detail. The other reason is that there are some analogies between what is happening now with the COVID crisis and what happened in the gay community with the AIDS crisis a few decades ago. And Sean was actively involved in ACT UP and of course Pause Magazine and other things, which he will outline. And in the earlier crisis, he also dealt with Dr. Fauci and has some interesting comments and observations about him.
Thank you very much. Let's bring Mayor Sean on. Hi, Sean. How are you? Thank you for being here. I love the lighting, by the way. That's very cool lighting.
Well, I don't really have much of a studio in my home. With all the time I'm spending on Zoom, I guess I should get something a little more professional put together. But I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and you are so kind to spend time with us. We want to talk to you about a variety of issues. But first, how are you doing personally through this crisis that we're all experiencing in different ways?
I'm doing fine. I mean, as a friend jokes, if it wasn't for all the death and sickness and bankruptcy and financial ruin, it's actually been a nice time. There are people staying in their homes. A lot of us are able to spend more time with our families and reflect on our lives and our priorities. And I think there are going to be some different things coming out of this that will be lasting. But I'm doing okay. Jonathan's right. Milford is a small town in northeast Pennsylvania. We're about 75 miles from New York City. So in one sense, we're in sort of an outer bedroom community, but it's also very rural and it's conservative. And the area went heavily for President Trump in 2016. We have a real dynamic between that's similar to the partisan divide that we see at the federal level. And that is, the COVID epidemic, and particularly around wearing of masks and social distancing and those kinds of measures, has really brought it to light. So it's been interesting and a challenge, but we were the first municipality in Pennsylvania to recommend that our residents stay in their homes except for necessary travel and to shut down businesses. We did it before any other municipality, before the state. And we were heavily criticized for it at the time, early in March. But now we're sort of seeing some of the benefit of that heightened awareness and being at the front edge of that curve, because we're doing better with fewer new transmissions than most of the areas around us.
And we're so glad to hear that you were able to bend that curve and have that impact. But this is such a tough situation. And your background as an activist means that you have seen big challenges and also big problems. Some of them overcome, some of them have not. I think that thinking about the AIDS crisis and the promise of a vaccine that seemed around the corner, if you remember, for years, and where we are today, and what we're waiting for with the vaccine and an HIV vaccine, all of those questions we will have a chance to delve into. We want everyone who's watching right now, please tell us where you're watching from. Please bring us your questions for Mayor Strub. May I call you Sean? Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Let's paint a picture of Milford, Pennsylvania. I'm going to show a map, if that's okay, so people can all get a sense of where we are. And we, as you know, we have people watching around the world, so it'll be important for you to kind of explain. Here's New York, and here's Scranton, Pennsylvania, which everyone knows from. It's the Electric City, as we know from watching The Office. And point me towards Philly, and there's Allentown. We see Allentown. We see Philadelphia. We see Harrisburg, the capital. So Pennsylvania's a big state right here. And here's New York. There's Connecticut, Boston. So I'm just giving people a sense of where you are. There's Philly. There's Baltimore. There's DC. So everyone sees that right there. So paint us a picture of Milford, please.
So Milford is in northeast Pennsylvania. We're 75 miles from New York City. We are 50 miles east of Scranton. So we're Scranton is the nearest big city, 75,000. That constitutes a big city locally. And it is in some ways the classic quintessential American small town. Atlantic Magazine once called it the prettiest county seat in America. And it's easy to see why. We have a lot of really charming 19th century architecture. The town was an early planned community. It was laid out in the 1790s in a perfect, grid pattern with alleys and so on. And it's an interesting mix of the rural and a lot of the families that have lived in this area since colonial times, as well as the New Yorkers who have weekend homes here, and some Philadelphians, but mostly New Yorkers. Where Philadelphia is almost twice as far away from us as New York. So about 40% of the homes in the county, the population is 56,000. About 40% of the homes are seasonal or weekend homes. So we have a big summer population and weekend population. And the community is culturally quite vibrant. We have a film festival, the Black Bear Film Festival. We have a fantastic Readers and Writers Festival every year. We have 2 music festivals, a contemporary dance festival. Last year was the first time we had an opera festival. So for a small town, it is culturally vibrant. We have a lot of historic built environment with the great architecture I mentioned. Several of the most famous American architects of the 19th century, Frederick Law Olmsted, McKim, Mead and White, Richard Morris Hunt, Chester Aldrich, Calvert Vaux, all have work here in Milford, in this little teeny tiny town. Now we're also the north gate to the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. That's about a 70,000 acre national park that runs on both sides of the Delaware River. So it's an incredible destination for hiking, and we have a whole network of waterfalls in the region, which, by the way, a network of waterfalls we've learned is called a fluviarchy. And so now when people are trying to spend time outdoors, we have a lot of people coming away from the city to come up here to hike and to do outdoor things that they feel safer in. So it's a great community. I love it. I can walk to the post office and the diner and the drugstore and all the things right from my home.
Well, we love that, and there's a charm about small town America that has been romanticized through decades of films and books and all of that. How much have you still preserved of that Main Street, pre-COVID, Main Street, the library, the friendly police, that kind of Mayberry type?
You're hitting on all cylinders here, because this is what we do. One of the things in Pennsylvania that mayors of boroughs, we're called a borough this size, one of my principal responsibilities is running the police department. And we have a very small police department, one of the smallest in the state. We have 2 full-time officers and 7 part-time officers. But we now have our officers on bicycles, doing bicycle patrols and doing pedestrian patrols and engaging with kids in the community and going to the schools. When they see a kid getting in trouble in one of our parks or something, or doing something they aren't we like them to be able to say, I know your mom, get your butt out of here, rather than this sort of militarized approach. A lot of effort in restoring our hardscape along the streets to make it more pedestrian friendly and to improve the landscaping. And the people who are attracted to Milford, the people who are coming here, are seeking that classic American small town, but with a little bit of a twist, because we have a lot of diversity here. I'm openly gay. I'm openly living with HIV. And so we have quite a diverse community, and we celebrate that. That isn't always easy, but we've been making a success of it. And if I can, do a sort of raw, unadulterated plug, a Dutch journalist named Max Westerman, a prominent Dutch journalist, been a friend of mine for a long time. When I was running for mayor in 2017, he thought I was crazy because he had visited here. He knows there's a store here that waves, flies a Confederate flag every day. He understands the kind of, conservative and really reactionary elements here. And so he started filming, and he made a documentary because he thought I was crazy. How is this town? And he made a wonderful film called My Friend the Mayor. And it is now streaming on Amazon Prime. So if you get Amazon Prime in your country, you can watch My Friend the Mayor and get a really, really great sense of what Milford is all about.
We're going to play a trailer from it in just a minute.
Oh, wow.
That'll be fun, and we'll all get a sense of you, a little bit more of a sense of you. There's a saying that Pennsylvania has Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and then, as you know, surrounded by Alabama. And that can also be said about parts of New York State. My kids and I were in New York State, upstate, beautiful part of the country a couple of years ago, and their jaws dropped the first time they saw Confederate flags in upstate New York. And then they started counting and stopped counting because there were so many. And that's also reality of America. And we will talk about that as well. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to play the trailer. I'll give you a couple of minutes to just take a breath, Sean. I know you're coming from your mayoral duties, and I hope dinner already. So one thing you can do is on Twitter, you can share. There are a couple of tweets with the video, so you can just share this video right now. So you can share it with your friends and your followers. That would be great. And then we'll come back and talk to you. Is that okay, Sean?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll find my Twitter.
And meanwhile, our friend Jonathan is dropping links into Facebook, and he will drop a link to this video as well that people can find. It's called myfriendthemayor.com. So not hard to find, myfriendthemayor.com. So let's now watch this. Let's watch this trailer right now. Here it comes. I am going to hit play in just 1 second. Everyone, tell us where you're watching from. Please tag your friends, tell them about this. And I know folks will want to know more and learn more about Mayor Sean Strub. And here is the video. Let's hit play.
Hi, this is Johnny calling as a volunteer from the Sean Strub for Mayor campaign.
You gotta get out and vote for Sean.
We'll make you the first dog of Milford.
And I have an opponent who's a very nice guy. But he grew up in the town, so there are people who babysat him, who are related to him.
When my friend Sean Strub told me he was running for mayor in this small town in Pennsylvania where he lives, I thought he was nuts. The town is Republican.
More people in Milford voted for Trump than voted for Hillary. My campaign chairperson even voted for Trump.
I think we're in good shape, but I don't think we should assume that it's a done deal.
There's not a real clear explanation how somebody can vote for that at the presidential level and then vote for, a lefty gay guy with AIDS for mayor.
He's openly gay, do you mind that?
If that's what he wants to do, if he does what he does to another man and a man does to him, that's fine. I've worked with gays and they're great people to work for. Great people. They always pay on time.
I remember when we moved here, they spray painted faggots in front of our driveway.
And that was a welcome to Milford.
These people are farming. They're farming. These people are pretty homophobic.
The polls close tonight at 8. Make sure to tune in at 10 and 11 for coverage of all the local election results.
Who did you vote for mayor?
Me?
Nick Mayor. And why?
I personally know.
Sean Strub.
Sean Strub, and why?
Because he's my landlord.
So Bill's worried.
Bill, are you worried?
I'm Bill and I'm worried. Yeah, they seem to be turning in a lot of people.
We're scrambling for the last votes, right? Just half an hour before poll closing.
So I'm not quite sure why Bill is so worried. By my calculation, I'm slaughtering him.
All right. So that's called My Friend the Mayor, and you can find that on this website of myfriendthemayor.com, and you can find it on the various channels where it is streaming. And there's Sean, the mayor. This was during the candidacy, and he was elected. Can you tell us the vote count?
Well, it's a very small town, so I don't remember it exactly, but it was like I think 220 to 270 or something like that, and it was only fewer than 500 votes were cast, but it was a very high turnout for the town. And while it's a small town, we're the county seat, so while only 1,000 people live in Milford Borough and are my constituents, about 20,000 have Milford as a mailing address. And many of them seem to think I'm their mayor, which I'm happy to be their mayor. But yeah, it was fun. It was a wonderful exercise in small town democracy. And what the film shows is that even at a time of this profound polarization, so much ugly stuff and people getting angry, and that at a local level there is a place for civil discourse, respectful disagreement. Nick May, my opponent, and I, were quite friendly. Both of us ran campaigns that we are proud of and that we feel really good about, and campaigns that engaged the community and made people aware of issues in the town they weren't conscious of. And one of the things happened since then, not just because I'm mayor, but because I think we had this really lively campaign on both sides, is many more people in our community show up at our meetings, and when we have an opening on the planning board or the zoning hearing board or the Shade Tree Commission. That's where the politics gets really serious, on the Shade Tree Commission. We have more people who are interested and willing to serve in those volunteer capacities.
You're not just talking to people around the world. You're talking to a guy who knows nothing about small town America. So Shade Tree Commission, this is about trees that provide shade, and therefore they're precious and therefore should not be cut down. More should be planted. Explain that, please.
It's the Shade Tree Commission manages what we call our urban forest, right? So we have blocks that are like typical small town block, and the trees that are in the verge between the sidewalk and the curb, and in our parks, we have several nice parks. The trees all have a little numeric tag and a number on them, and the Shade Tree Commission keeps track of those trees, when they were planted, what kind of tree, and they trim them and replace them when they need to. And they keep an eye on the private property owners' trees and say, hey, you got a branch there that's maybe needs to go. Milford also, and I guess this is a really important part of understanding what Milford is about, is we're the birthplace of the American conservation movement, largely because of a man named Gifford Pinchot. And Gifford Pinchot was a very privileged son of French immigrants who were Bonapartists who came here in the early 19th century. Milford was a big French settlement. And his father and grandfather were in the forestry business, and he grew up watching these virgin forests being clear cut, and then the rain eroding and destroying the land. And he was interested in how it can address that. And as a young man, he was sent to France, where forestry was emerging as a discipline, as a professional scientific discipline, and came back and was the first scientifically trained forester in the U.S. And he went to work for Commodore Vanderbilt at the Biltmore, which is a massive estate in North Carolina. And he began to put some of his ideas in practice. And he's the one who, first of all, introduced the word conservation, the idea of how we manage our national patrimony, right? Our lands and waters and animals and so on. And his thing was that these natural resources should be managed for the greatest good, for the greatest number, for the greatest period of time. And Teddy Roosevelt had him create our U.S. Forest Service. And in the U.S., we have the Forest Service and we have the National Park Service. And they both have responsibility for management of huge, massive tracts of federal land. The Park Service is part of the Interior Department, and they are kept for park and recreation and scenic vistas, in theory. That's the idea. The Forest Service and its 150 or 60 million acres is part of the Department of Agriculture, because this was, how do we manage this resource on a sustainable basis? You know, the country, we need wood, we need forest products, but how can we do it without destroying the forest, without destroying the land? And those were ideas that Pinchot began to put in place in the late 19th century. Here in Milford, we have something called the Milford Experimental Forest, which is about 1,100 acres. And it's the largest piece of land that has been under continuous scientific study in North America. And when President Kennedy was here in 1963, shortly before he was killed, it was a ceremony involving the Pinchot family, and he called Gifford Pinchot the father of the conservation movement. So trees are quite precious here. The Yale Forestry School was once located here. The American Foresters Association began here, and foresters from all over the world. We actually had some foresters from India here in Milford a few years ago that come here for conferences that the U.S. Forest Service puts on.
Oh, that's just amazing. One of the things we want to do is to do a global tour right now and introduce you to people watching from around the world, but some may be down the street. So let's see who's watching. Neil Parekh says, great guest, great co-host too, Jonathan Boorstein. And Neil is the executive producer of our very important other show that we run. It's called the New York Times Read Along, and we read the Sunday New York Times out loud every Sunday on Facebook Live and all of these channels. So please join us, and I'll tell you more about who's on that show in a little bit. We're also joined from Philadelphia by Laura Silverman. She says, howdy from Philly. And Tim is watching from Shahola, Pennsylvania. I'm not sure I get the pronunciations right, but Tim is a good friend, and he says hello. And Tim says, Sean is amazing, such an inspirational story. So there we go. And he also throws in a Jonathan Rocks. I'm going to bring Jonathan on in a few minutes to ask you some tough questions, but also to reminisce a little bit about the days when you had a different life and a different career back in the late 80s and the 90s. We'll talk about that. And Laura says, proud follower number 4,500 of Sean Strub, and puts in your Twitter handle. So there you go. By the way, I wanted to note, you have 1,100 population and you have 11,000 acres or something like that. Is that, or 1,100 acres, did you say?
Well, no, the borough is, I don't know how many acres it is, maybe 6 or 7.
No, but you're talking about the acres of forest, the special acres.
Oh, in the county.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the county is, I don't know how many acres it is, but about a third of our county. The county is roughly maybe 30, 40 miles square, roughly.
Right.
And a third of that is state or federal park or game land. Wow. Another third of it is properties with conservation easements or scout camps or, big camps that are relatively protected. So, when the megalopolis growing out from New York, if it continues to expand, eventually the projections, the urban planners say it will reach Scranton at some point. At that point, Pike County, that Milford is the county seat of, will look like Central Park in the middle of it, this big green, protected place with a pristine water supply. In Pennsylvania, they rank the streams according to different quality, and the highest ranking of a waterway in the state is called exceptional value. And all of the exceptional value streams in the state run through unpopulated areas. They're in the forests or whatever, except for 2 that run through Milford and come into our little village.
What are the names?
The Sawkill and the Vandermark and the Raymond Skill. They have old Dutch names because the Dutch were some of the first European settlers in the area.
Right. I spent time in Media, Pennsylvania, and Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, which was, by the way, the first office of the New York Times television company, if you can believe it. Long story. And I learned how hard some of the names between native names and Dutch names, you can get all in a twist if you're trying to track all the names out there. Tim Sun says, always love your shows, Sree. Love your shows, Sree. Such amazing guest and host. Thank you. And by the way, Tim was our very first sponsor. They say you never forget.
Oh my God.
and he did, and I'll never forget. Very grateful. And Stefan says, my Spin It Social Hour co-producer, Le Flaneur, with major hatitude, the one and only Jonathan Boorstein, who you'll see again in just a few minutes. Ajay says, hi, team. And Roberta is watching from Richmond, Virginia. Any Richmond memories, or have you been there?
I don't know if I ever have been there.
Okay.
Some time in Charlottesville, and it's a beautiful state, but I haven't been to Richmond.
All right. We'll ask you for your favorite. Maybe there's a political thing, and you may get in trouble. Your favorite Philly cheesesteak store in Philadelphia?
Oh my gosh!
I don't know if you even eat Philly cheesesteak, but
it has been a long time. But I did have a friend in Philadelphia who took me somewhere. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was on South Street. But the whole Philly cheesesteak, it's a whole environment. It's not just the food. Honestly, the sandwich, I'm not sure they're all that great. But the whole idea and the aura and being reflective. You know what Philadelphia does have? Do you know what scrapple is?
I've heard of it. Tell me.
So scrapple is a regional food, and it's almost exclusively Pennsylvania. I've never heard of scrapple except in Pennsylvania. I'm not even sure what it is, but it's a lot of scraps that you might not ordinarily want to eat if you knew what they were, but they fry them up and serve it at breakfast. Sometimes they'll throw a little bit of bacon in there just to kind of throw you off, but it's called scrapple, and it's a Pennsylvania delicacy, sort of like shoe-fly pie. Did you ever have shoe-fly pie in Media?
No, I did not have that, but we'll. Stefan says yes to Friday night libations and Corona with lime here. Anywhere else? Roberta says, I love this show. Thank you all. And Tim is giving a shout out to Rose Horowitz, who is our producer. She's not here today. And Sujana Chandrasekhar, one of our surgeon friends who hosts She's on Call, says, hello from the land of kind of tired ear docs. How many doctors do you have? Do you have like a town doctor? The way you have 2 police officers, we heard. How many doctors?
Well, I'll tell you something. Your friend, the doctor there, asking this question, we would welcome you to come here because we are a desert in medical services. We are one of only a couple of counties in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, 67 counties, that does not have a hospital. We don't have an urgent care facility. This is the downside, right? It's rural and it's beautiful in this incredible natural environment that's pristine. Now, we do have hospitals, within 10, 25 miles, but very few doctors. The only doctor in the county that's practicing with a practice is a woman who was the only, she's not the only doctor in the county. She's the only doctor in the county who really got involved in COVID and offered testing. She was the first to offer testing in the county. Right now, only her practice and the Walmart are the only 2 places to get COVID testing in the county. So that is one of our challenges. Our whole healthcare infrastructure is really limited.
I should ask you, how are you doing with COVID? How many cases? Talk about that a little bit, please.
Sure. Well, the county is 56,000. We've had about 520 confirmed cases. We've had very, very little testing. We've had 22 deaths now. And we've had, it is a struggle. While we got an early start and we're doing better than a lot of our neighbors, most of our neighbors, we have had a little bit of upcreep in the last couple of weeks. And of course, we're not an island. As I was telling you, we have so much back and forth with weekenders and people from New York and other parts of the country. So it takes a constant vigilance. And we have done everything. We put banners up across all the streets coming into town. We bought sanitation supplies. masks and hand sanitizer and antibacterial wipes and germicidal bleach for all the businesses in town. We provide it to them without charge. We started a COVID relief fund and raised and distributed about $50,000, including helping people whose circumstances have become so difficult from COVID, losing their jobs and other financial challenges. So we've done a lot of stuff, and we've done a lot of work to try and figure out how to salvage as much of our business community as we can. We have a small commercial district, and these small towns in America struggle. You hear about the great American economy. When people talk about the economy, 99 times out of 100, they're talking about Wall Street. So it's wonderful that Wall Street does well. But Main Street in America has not been doing as well. And that's been a degradation that's been happening for decades. And I think that with many people leaving cities now and rediscovering small town and rural life, maybe we'll see some revitalization there.
Thank you. Ajay is asking in the comments a lot of questions about starting school. So how many schools do you have? Do you have a lot of young people there? And what are you doing? And I want to tell Ajay that this is not our medical show. And you should go to She's on Call on Facebook and Twitter. We had an amazing show just last week, or last Sunday, all about going back to school. And the president of the American Academy of Pediatrics was there, as well as the executive director of the School Nurses Association. So please go and follow at She's on Call, and please join us Sunday at 11 a.m. to learn more about this. But I'm going to ask Sean just the question about schooling and how are you dealing with your constituents who have young kids?
Sure. Well, we have 3 school districts in the county. My community is all as part of the Delaware Valley School District. And we're fortunate that we have an excellent public school system and a very responsible superintendent and leadership there. But to me, the question isn't open schools or don't open schools. It's really about what are the safety protocols in place? What are the options for the parents? What happens when somebody, when a kid does, come down? How do you then go back and track through and protect that? And our school district I haven't even read it yet, but it was just in the weekly paper today, 5 different potential strategies around reopening. But I think they're prioritizing being able to provide online learning simultaneous with the in-person classes as an option for any parents that prefer that, as well as breaking up the students into sort of like pods, so that if there is an outbreak, it's somewhat more contained, maybe going to half days or alternate. They have a whole series of different things, as well as the sanitation protocols at the school. So I don't think it's I think the one pediatric association spoke about how important it was for especially young children to be socializing, to be in that environment with other kids, and that you lose something, when you're 5 or 6 or 7 years old, not having that. So that is important, and online learning is not the same. And we'll see, they're about a month away from opening. I think our schools open a month from today, August 31st.
No, we're praying for everybody and hope they all, get through it safely. We have to be so careful. And this is the kind of thoughtful leadership we need, not just in Milford, but at the state level and, of course, at the federal level as well. We have so many comments coming in. Ajay says once they have a COVID vaccine, it should be free for everybody rather than for certain folks. And Apollo is watching from Las Vegas. And I have to ask you, what is your favorite memory of Vegas that you can tell us about?
That I can tell you about? Well, there are 2. I saw Blue Man Group in Vegas, which I really loved. And a friend and I were there once, and we took the helicopter over the Grand Canyon, and it is so dramatic. It's not too far above what looks like desert, right? You have no idea you're approaching the Grand Canyon, and suddenly you go over the edge and you see this vastness all below. That was a real stomach leaping kind of experience, but that was fun. So that's the best I can do with Vegas.
Those are the ones you can share. Please go back, everyone, and watch Apollo's episode about life in Vegas under COVID. We learned so much, and he also shared what it's like to be African-American and living in Vegas, sure, but also African-American and living in India, in Bangladesh. What he learned his interactions with the police, fascinating. And our friend Terry Thompson was also in the episode, so please check that out. Paul Knox says hello, good friend of mine, and he says hi to Sean. And Carla is watching from Cape Coral, Florida, and Makrand is watching from Miami. And he's saying that AIDS, HIV virus, early red alerts are the same as coronavirus. So he's giving some, I want to be very careful about medical advice on this show. My mom is watching from Kerala, India. Have you been to India?
I have not been to India. I had a very good friend who was stationed in Mumbai for a while and was so encouraging, and I regret so much not going there. But I will get there when we can travel again.
Great. And Alex, who's also watching from the same town, it's a small town in India, about 1 million people. And it's not even the biggest city in the state. It's the capital of the state of Kerala, Trivandrum, Thiruvananthapuram it's called, but it's not even the biggest city in the state. And so he says, I love forests and admire people conserving forests. Is the only thing that we can leave for our future generations. Beautifully said. Vandana, who's watching from Philly, says, I ate a Philly cheesesteak this afternoon. She is one of our amazing producers who makes this possible. And lots of folks. And my mom says, amazing guests and shows every day. And Tim says, I'm learning so much about Milford's history. So let's actually leave Milford behind. Let's go to New York City. Let's bring in our friend Jonathan Boorstein and talk about your life earlier, your early life 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when we were in the middle of another crisis and on the radio and hearing about the gay cancer in 1982-83. And you remember that's the words they used. And there was panic at a national level. And we saw over time the failure of Ronald Reagan to address this head on, to take leadership, take ownership, to help the gay community and others who were suffering from AIDS, what devastation it led to. The hope always was there'd be a vaccine around the corner, and here we are, decades later. So I'm going to step away, and my friend Jonathan and his friend Sean are going to have a little conversation, and we have about 2 hours, I believe. No, I'm kidding. Sean has to take a nap, and so does Jonathan, and so do I. So let's go for a few minutes of a conversation between both of you. Does that sound okay?
Great.
All right, Jonathan, over to you. And make sure I know your hat is very stylish, but move it up a little bit so we can see your eyes, please. Just tip it up a little bit. There you go. Yeah, there you go. Well done. All right, over to you, gentlemen. And Jonathan, you're in charge.
Oh, I can't hear Jonathan.
Thank you. The mic was muted. Let's scroll back to down memory lane. You had two interesting reactions to Gay's crisis. One was to be involved with ACT UP, and the other was to found Pause Magazine. Let's start with ACT UP, because you dealt with Dr. Fauci then, and you also were working with Larry Kramer and other people.
Well, so even Jonathan, if we could go a little bit before ACT UP, because ACT UP didn't start until March of 1987. And as Sree was just pointing out, the epidemic, or the first cases were identified in 1981. And in 1984, I got involved, and I knew from the very beginning, whatever this was, it had something to do with me, because the early symptoms, the swollen lymph glands, the weight loss, and were all things, in the night sweats were things that I was already experiencing. And when the test came out in 85, I tested positive and wasn't the least bit surprised. But I got involved with the People with AIDS Coalition in New York. And the advocacy that preceded ACT UP, when people think of ACT UP, they think of these big spectacular demonstrations in the street, right? St. Patrick's Cathedral and shutting down Grand Central and all the things that we did, which were very important. And I don't want to sound like I'm diminishing that, because I think that was critical to saving my life, among others. But the advocacy that preceded ACT UP was really people with AIDS focused on each other, creating our own sort of do-it-yourself movement. The doctors didn't know anything about this. We knew more about the disease than the people treating us, because we were talking to each other and sharing notes and learning from each other. we started our own network, a parallel structure of healthcare service delivery, because the existing healthcare service delivery structure was not serving us, and a lot of it didn't want to serve us. We started our own media. We started our own community clinical trials. Long before the government was doing clinical trials, testing things at drug companies, and we were experimenting ourselves. And so then we started getting the frontline community physicians to start collecting that data from their patients to expedite the research process. And that was really the self-empowerment movement. I remember Dr. Srinivasan, who's one of the truly important heroes of the epidemic, telling his patients, you need to save yourselves. Don't expect anybody else, the politicians, the gay community, anybody else. You have to do it yourself. And so that was people with AIDS focused on each other and creating this network of support, empowering each other, and kind of creating a movement out of it. Then when ACT UP came along in 1987, you can also, and by the way, the pre-1987, what I'm talking about, this empowerment movement, was really built around the principles of the women's health movement. The 1983 Denver Principles Declaration, written by a group of people with AIDS, was a manifesto that outlined a series of rights and responsibilities of people with AIDS and people who provided care and loved them. But then in 1987, by then, there was sort of like a critical mass of gay white men of relative privilege who were terrified, who were getting sick, were dying. Their closets were being smashed because it was obvious they were ill, and you weren't worrying about the long-term effect on your career. You were wondering if you were going to live until spring. And so there's another part of ACT UP that is seen as kind of a temper tantrum of white male rage, because a lot of white men had never experienced feeling like the government didn't care if they lived or died, feeling like they were just being cast aside. Many others who were affected by the epidemic were accustomed to that feeling. They'd experienced it in other ways. So AIDS kind of had to get in line. But for these gay white men, that was kind of new. And so we were angry, right? And we weren't so much focused on each other. We were focused externally on the institutions of power, the White House, Congress, the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, the pharmaceutical industry, the media. And so that was what ACT UP became about, really pushing those institutions to get them to do the things they should have been doing all along anyway. And I think one of the reasons that, I was so insistent that our Milford community, that we respond to COVID early and aggressively, is because I saw firsthand what poor or timid or absent political leadership meant to people's lives. It meant the difference between life and death. If the Reagan administration responded differently in the early years of the epidemic, vast numbers of people would have been prevented from suffering this disease. 75 million people or so in the world have had HIV, and half of them are dead. I'm not the kind of medical and economist to figure out how many fewer that would be, but you have to remember that when we were first trying to get the Reagan administration to act, the number of people with AIDS was counted in the hundreds or a few thousand. There was such an opportunity to prevent transmission, and we blew it. And I don't put all of the blame on the Reagan administration, although we know now what was suspected at that time. It wasn't that they weren't aware of it. They were absolutely, utterly aware of it. We have notes from, I think, the Domestic Policy Council that Gary Bauer chaired, where Gary Bauer was saying things like, well, let's just let nature take its course. It's nature cleaning house. They're all, homosexuals and sex workers and drug addicts anyway. That was the, belief that sort of underscored their response. But it wasn't just that. I've been looking back at...
Sorry, it's Sree, just stepping in here. Gary Bauer, that Gary Bauer was in charge of somehow of dealing with the AIDS crisis, or had an impact? For those of you who don't know, that would be like having the worst anti-mask person in charge of of COVID response. In some ways, that is what is happening. The president is in charge. Jared Kushner, we have learned today, thought that it's anyway democratic states that are being affected, so let it run its course. So we are seeing, what have they taught us? That history repeats itself. Learn, listen, pay attention, and you've just brought that alive to me. Thank you very much, and there's a great conversation. Sorry to interfere. I'm jumping back out.
No, Gary Bauer came from one of the religious, right groups, but I think he chaired Reagan's Domestic Policy Council. But the other thing that I think is very important and that we really haven't done yet is, speaking as somebody who was a gay activist and came in through sort of that advocacy, is we need to go back and look at our own community's leadership and what we did, not to find blame. I'm not. When I look at the leadership of the gay community in the early 80s, I don't see them doing things any differently than I probably would have had I been in their positions at the time. But we did make mistakes. And I think we need to go back and look at those and understand those in order to lessen the likelihood of these kinds of disasters happening again and again. Nope, you're on mute, John. There.
I'm off. I'm no longer. It's creating even a scarier parallel than I think a lot of people are recognized. And you also dealt with Dr. Fauci, I believe, at that time, or is that a little later in time?
Well, no, and this is complicated because I was somewhat critical of Dr. Fauci in BodyCounts in my memoir, and I speak of really three incidents that each I think illustrate something important about him. Having said that, I sure wish Dr. Fauci was being listened to a lot more by the president right now. I wish Dr. Fauci had been more outspoken earlier in the epidemic, and he is an incredibly accomplished scientist and federal official. But I think it's important to understand that he's also a brilliant politician. I can't think of another senior federal official who has been in such a powerful position for so long through 6 or 7 different presidents now. And he was close to these presidents. This was and one example that I point out was, you may remember when Vice President Cheney's chief of staff, Scooter Libby, was convicted for leaking some information about a CIA operative that put them in danger. Well, Dr. Fauci was right there with a letter to the president asking him to pardon Scooter Libby, this Republican operative for the vice president. Now, why a scientist would get involved in that, I'm not sure, but it's an example of how close he has been to power throughout his tenure in office. And then another example I cite is, it was in 1983, at a time when it was already known that HIV was not, well, before we knew whatever it was, right, that we knew AIDS was not transmitted casually, that you had to have sexual contact or blood or something like this to transmit it. Dr. Fauci co-authored an article that ran in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Journal of the American Medical Association that raised the prospect of household transmission. It was one case in New Jersey, and they sort of looked at this case and sort of implied, oh, wait a minute, it might be transmitted more casually. I believe, I know that most of the medical establishment at that time knew better, but I think that this related to Dr. Fauci trying to scare Congress into allocating the funds that were needed, including for his lab. And this was not long before, I think it was $7 or $8 million he got from Congress for his lab, which was a huge amount of money at the time. And then the most egregious incident with Dr. Fauci, and I believe he owes an apology for this. He obviously disagrees. I think this is a failing of such scale that it needs accountability is owed. In 1987, frontline physicians had learned that a very inexpensive and widely available drug, a sulfa drug called Bactrim, or the different names for it, but it was available generically, was extremely effective at preventing people at high risk of acquiring pneumocystis pneumonia from getting it. And you knew someone was at high risk because their CD4 counts, their T cells, would get very, very low. And once they got below a certain number, they were really high risk of opportunistic infections. And this drug was used to treat the pneumocystis when somebody was diagnosed, and they frequently would then get it again and again, but it wasn't being used as a prophylaxis. And Michael Callan, who was a heroic early AIDS activist in New York, the Callan Lord Clinic is named after Michael Callan and Audre Lorde, the great poet. Michael Callan and a group of activists went to Washington. They got an appointment with Dr. Fauci to beg him to issue guidelines from the federal government saying, hey, this drug, it's inexpensive, we know the safety profile, and it's incredibly effective at preventing pneumonia, which was the #1 killer of people with AIDS at the time, in people who had low CD4 counts, had impaired immune systems. And Dr. Fauci refused to do it. He said he wanted clinical trials. It turns out there was a company, a Japanese company, that had created a device to deliver the drug in an aerosolized way, very expensively through this device. The ad paper was called aerosolized pentamidine. You'd go and you'd breathe in and out of the machine. And it was 2 years. They found out that the aerosolized version didn't work as well, and it spread TB because all these people are coming breathing in and out of it. And it was 2 years before they issued that guidance from the federal government to use Bactrim. And in that time, about 17,000 people, mostly gay men, suffocated to death. And a very large percentage of them, probably a majority of them, would not have died had Fauci had followed the very strong recommendation of the activists, people with AIDS. Michael Callan was so upset about it on the Amtrak, on the train coming back from Washington to New York. He wrote a memo to history saying that this was just such a horrific error and was going to cause many, many unnecessary deaths. So, when people ask me, do you think Dr. Fauci, is this wonderful, brilliant, whatever, sort of St. Anthony, I call him. He and I both went to Jesuit high schools. And I'm not suggesting he's not dedicated or anything like that. He is, and he's devoted his career to to this work. But they ask, do you think and my answer to that is, if you think that the American response to AIDS was brilliant, if you think we did it right, if you think this is something that the world should emulate, then you got to give that credit to Dr. Fauci, because he's been essentially the CEO of AIDS in America since 1983 or 4. If, on the other hand, if you think we made horrific mistakes, or if you think this was an unmitigated disaster, as I believe it was, the deaths are and the mistakes are so massive. Well, you know what? Some of that responsibility has to go to Dr. Fauci's feet as well.
Is it possible that Fauci learned from his mistakes with the AIDS crisis in how he's dealing with the COVID crisis?
I am sure he has learned from his mistakes. He is a smart person, and smart people continue to learn. And certainly, even during those years of the epidemic, his own response, he became much more collaborative with the community and began to understand what a lot of us had to contribute to. So yes, I think he has learned, but I also think that he and other public health officials, John Barry, who's the academic who spent pretty much his entire career studying the 1918 influenza pandemic, and he was asked, if you could sum it up, what's the one lesson from the 1918 influenza pandemic that we should be paying attention to? And he said it was that the government and political and policy leadership should tell the truth, the absolute unvarnished truth, as early and as often as they can. And we didn't do that here. And a brilliant example is masks. So in Milford, we started advocating masks. My partner, Javi, John, you've met Javi. He worked with a group to organize making masks for volunteers, and we provided them to healthcare workers and to the senior care facilities and to our neighbors and people in the street. Now, at that time, the Centers for Disease Control, the Trump administration, Dr. Fauci, oh, no, don't wear masks. Don't worry about masks. Don't need to wear masks. And a lot of them were saying they won't do anything. And some of them were saying, oh, they might harm you because they'll trap the virus in it and all this. And that message was driven by a noble intent because there was a limited supply of personal protective equipment, particularly the N95 masks, which are sort of the gold standard. And those needed to be reserved for healthcare workers who were at such risk. But instead of saying that and saying, don't use those there, you can make them. Look, this is how you can make it. Here's a video. You're showing with me. Get your sewing club. They didn't. They said masks, they don't work. Don't need to worry about that. If we had started promoting masks earlier, the WHO just finally came around to recommending masks. The president finally wore one officially a few days ago. 150,000 people in the U.S. are dead. And here in Little Milford, Pennsylvania, and lots of other places, and people who had like basic common sense have been wearing masks since early March or earlier. So I think this was predicated. This was not telling the truth early on because of some other priority that thought was more important than the truth.
Money over people, alas. The to sort of jump back and forth in time, you are personally also involved in something that's echoing here in New York, which is, in addition to being mayor, you own a wonderful boutique hotel where I've stayed. I just sort of like, I have to disclose just some conflict of interest here. And it has or had a restaurant, and you've been posting on your timeline a lot about the problems that restaurants are having surviving in COVID.
Well,
would you care to amplify?
Sure. First of all, what the listeners here that may not know is that John has a sort of a particular restaurant niche himself, because he wrote a book called Table for One.
Yep.
Right? About dining alone, which I just loved it. It was such a clever concept. I think, the restaurant industry is, going to be altered forever, and many restaurants are closing. I believe many more are going to close. My own business, my sister and Javi and I run, is, we're still open. We're struggling. We're trying to find a new path forward. Fortunately, this is the busiest time of year for the hotel part. So even we're only about half the occupancy we had a year ago, but we do have guests coming in. We were serving outdoors. Our porch was full tonight, but between the various facilities, we see a couple hundred people indoors, and that's all closed because people don't want to eat indoors, understandably, and we're not for sure we want to be serving them indoors. Our staff all wear masks or shields. We require the guests, when they're at their table, they're uncovered, but if they get up to go to the bathroom, when they're arriving or leaving, they need to wear masks. And our guests have been pretty good about that. We've had some who have been resistant, and we just say we're sorry. Not my favorite, but one of the ones that was really annoying was a woman who told one of our staff people that she was fine. She'd already had it. She wasn't worried about getting it. And she was like totally oblivious to talking to a server, who's a young person who's also trying to protect themselves, who might be living with a grandparent or somebody who's immune compromised, and kind of just oblivious or concerned about anybody else. But most of our guests are pretty terrific. There have been incidents in stores and in other restaurants where people have made scenes. The meltdowns, the mass meltdowns, and loads of videos of them on YouTube. And I will tell you, they're like all white people. I'm sorry. It's just go look at them. Look at Google mask meltdowns and watch these videos. They're horrifying. It's kind of like some kind of weird sort of porn where you're seeing people behave unbelievably ugly and awful and uncaring to others. With some poor server clerk at a store saying, "I'm sorry, I can't serve you," or would you please put a mask on or whatever. The arrogance and the privilege expressed is really insulting. We had it the next town over, an incident, I think it was just last week, where at a Walmart, and an elderly woman was shopping, and there was a young couple, and they weren't wearing masks. And she asked them if they could please put their masks on, and the woman did, and the man didn't, and he refused. And it escalated. She said, "Well, I'm going to talk to the manager." And she went over to the service counter, and this man who wouldn't put his mask on came over and spit in her face. And then he ran out of the store. Unfortunately, the security camera could identify him and he's been charged with assault, which he could be. Why, protecting the people around you and yourself has become a politicized issue, I just don't understand. It's just the most insane thing in the world.
It seems to me that it is an extension of things we've seen with no smoking bans in restaurants, helmet laws for motorcycles, and things of that nature. It echoes previous rounds, and seatbelts is another one. Some of the things have prevailed, at least in New York City. It's all restaurants are no smoking. Seatbelt laws are here. Failed at others. I think, to judge from what I see out my window, I'd say it's about a 1/3 failure on the mask ruling here in the city, which is horrifying. As someone who's a senior citizen, I'm not happy. Rolling back to ACT UP. ACT UP has a couple of successors, Rise and Resist and Gays Against Guns. And they have been doing some of a lot of ACT UP's more theatrical demonstrations. I think Rise and Resist has a weekly event in front of one of the Trump buildings. Is this something you sort of note in passing? Something as someone who was so active in ACT UP, it's like nice to know someone's carrying on, or do you think this is counterproductive, or what do you think?
Well, I think people getting in the streets and expressing themselves is a really good thing. And I think that this moment in the response around the police violence has been extraordinary because of how sustained it has been. And I don't think it's going away until there are serious reforms implemented. ACT UP didn't arise out of nowhere. We certainly have a history of political theater and protest in the streets in the U.S. ACT UP kind of took it in a new direction, and others have moved after that. We got a lot of guidance from others. One of the most famous actions was when we put the gigantic condom over Jesse Helms's house. So Jesse Helms was a U.S. senator from North Carolina. He's one of the very last sort of unreconstructed racist, overt segregationists, who I think up until he died was advocating segregation of the races, a relic from another era. And he was awful about gay people and about the epidemic. And so a group of us, I was one of them, wanted to do an action. We decided to do something at his house to make people laugh at him, because we thought he was a joke. Unfortunately, it was a deadly joke, but his ideas and concepts were so out of it. So we had a gigantic condom made out of parachute material. It was 35 feet high when it was fully erect. And we had help from Greenpeace. So Greenpeace did a lot of direct action. So the guy from Greenpeace, went around the house with us at night and took pictures to figure out measurements and get the data on the average response time from the local police precinct and how fast can we get this thing inflated with portable generators and so on. But I look back at some of that stuff that we did at ACT UP, And you couldn't do it today because you would be in jail. The free speech is not quite as free as it used to be in the United States. Demonstrations in the street are much more controlled, and of course, as we've seen, are bring a lot more violence from police. And now with this sort of federal police, whatever we call them, the brown shirts that sort of show up that Trump's been sending around to some of these cities. This is something we haven't seen before, where a van pulls over and jumps out and drags the protester into the van, unmarked van, and drives off. This is a scary new development in the U.S. So, yes, ACT UP has inspired all sorts of other things, but the environment we're working in is also quite different. The political risk, what is at stake, is much greater today as well.
Mm-hmm. I think I read somewhere that the actual unmarked police vehicles that are hitting, Portland mostly, but also even a couple here in New York, are actually mercenaries from one of Eric Prince's companies. I don't know how validated that has been.
No, there have been a number of those stories. In Milford, our little tiny bucolic country Milford, pretty tiny seat in America, we've had 3 Black Lives Matters events, and we've had 2 kind of counter events. One was really open Milford up, wanting the stores open again, and this one, nobody wore masks, but it kind of all merges into the Trump, anti-science, extreme religious beliefs and so on. But we've had the 3 Black Lives Matter events and the 2 other events, and we've done it without warrant. At our first Black Lives Matter event, it was held in the courthouse, where about 275 people showed up, which was a huge, huge number. And the night before, I was speaking with our police chief. We have a really fantastic police chief named Matt McCormick, who really believes in community policing and understands what community policing means. It's not just a phrase. And I was curious. I said, well, how are the other members of the force, how are people responding to the George Floyd thing? And the chief responded with such vehemence and how upset they were and how this reflects so poorly on all law enforcement. And I said, well, how would you feel about putting out a statement about it? And he said, sure. So we drafted a statement, and a very strong statement, expressing support for the ideas behind Black Lives Matters, recognizing the need for changes in policing. And so as the group was gathering, the chief and Corporal Troy and another officer and I showed up. And of course, lots of people knew me because I'm involved in all the progressive politics. But then we had this paper we started passing out. And, well, what's this? The police passing out a paper. And they read this paper. They were just really pleased because it was so unexpected. And then when the rally began, because there were so many people and everybody was masked and socially distanced. And when I say everybody was masked, I mean everybody was masked. They were all masked and socially distant, that it took up such a huge area. It went, down the street on either side of the courthouse, that people couldn't hear the little handheld loudspeaker that the organizers had brought to, for the speakers. So Chief comes over to me and says, Sean, he says, we could pull a squad car up onto the courthouse lawn and you could use the PA system in the car and they'll hear that. So talk to the organization, sure. So the police car starts to drive up onto the lawn, and that kind of felt like a little bit of a tense moment. What on earth is going on? And then when people realized, they applauded. And so, we have that kind of relationship with our community because we put that kind of effort into it. And then a couple of weeks later, we had a rally that the Northeast Pennsylvania regional director of the Trump campaign organized. It was called to support law enforcement. And of course, yes, to support law enforcement. And that was being held in the morning, and then a Black Lives Matter action in the afternoon. And we would not typically have allowed the 2 events to happen in the same day. That's a lot for our little borough, even if they weren't political, sort of adversaries in some way. but for various reasons, it worked out that way. And we did that without incident. And at the police rally, the speakers were, really were very clear, because that was in the morning. They said, please, we want to be respectful in this community. We want to be respectful with people we disagree with. And so there's no heckling, or it wasn't anything like that. So I'm kind of proud of that. This is, you're talking about how Milford is kind of a microcosm in certain ways. And, and we see these things that we think could be replicated in other small towns across the country. I ultimately got elected because people didn't see me as a label. They saw me as a neighbor, as somebody who's involved in the community. And, there's not a Democratic or Republican way to pick up the garbage or, sweep the streets. And I think if we're ever going to get past this incredible partisan divide, it isn't going to be, and much as I want a new president, it isn't going to be because we elect somebody new at the White House and it's going to filter down and all's going to change. No, the division is more profound than that. There will be polarization around that. When it will change is when it happens from the grassroots up, when it happens with people building common cause with their neighbor that they might disagree with on all sorts of things, any kind of social or cultural issue or whatever it is. They may have profound disagreements, but they can find things to work on in their community and learn to respect each other and see each other as individuals and their ideas worthy of being heard. And that's what we've tried to show Milford. That's what the film My Friend the Mayor really conveys. But I think it can happen anywhere.
Hi, folks. This is Sree. I'm so sorry to step into this perfect conversation both of you are having right now. I've learned so much. I know everybody's learned so much, but we said the show is about 45 minutes an hour. We're already at almost 90 minutes. I want to thank Jonathan for doing such a great job in masterfully taking us back and forth in time. Not easy. And for Sean to keep up with all of that. We have some more comments we want to read, and I really do want to let you go. So, Jonathan, thank you for being here. I'm going to take it with Sean from here. Jonathan has watched 142 episodes, folks. He's a hero. My wife, who's right here, has not seen 142. My mother has not. I have not, even though I've been here, I've not watched all 142. I thank you, Jonathan. You are amazing, a dear friend, and we've got to get that Nutella cafe lunch or dinner. If the cafe is still there, we're going to go and eat soon. Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you, Sean. Here's Tim saying, Milford festivals are amazing. And I guess people can find out more by going to a website that you have there.
Yes, they can. MilfordPA.us is sort of our Milford thing. But one of the reasons they're amazing is because Tim has built a really wonderful local business in helping people market on the internet. And he does work on some of our festivals, particularly for our Milford Readers and Writers Festival. So MilfordReadersandWriters.com, Black Bear Filmfestival.com, but MilfordPA.us should connect to all of those.
Carla says, I love that national park. You were talking about it an hour ago. Laura says the Delaware Water Gap is breathtaking. And I can tell you that that's true. And Apollo says, thank you so much for your AIDS, HIV activism. You made a path for all of us. And you're a vital link to a generation of gay people who fell through that viral outbreak, who fell during that viral outbreak. What are some differences between that outbreak and now? Is it simply an affinity of sexuality? And I also want to ask, what does it feel like when people call you, an icon or a hero? You may still think of yourself as this guy and at this age, and you still look great. But tell me about what that's like. Where did the decades go? Do you ever feel that?
Yes, it goes very fast. I didn't appreciate my youth when I had it. But I will say something about the hero label, which I think has been way overused. First of all, a lot of my advocacy around the epidemic was inspired by a very, very selfish purpose to survive. The I do know heroes. They're not generally people who are quoted in the media or photographed. So I'm just always, and I'm not just like being, fake, humble, whatever. It truly makes me uncomfortable, just because I know of so many people who did so much earlier than I did, and continue to do so much. So, I like finding the ordinary heroes. I can tell you there was a woman in my apartment building who cooked and cleaned and changed diapers for several men in our building who died. And I don't even know what she did for a living. I think she might have worked at the library or something like that. Not somebody with a lot of resources or whatever, but her life for years was just taking care of whoever came across her path who was in need. That's heroic. I mean, I am humbled when I think of people like that, and there are so many of them. Thank you. Thank you. But a lot of us have heroes in our everyday lives that deserve recognition.
And I will say that there are people like that now who are helping their neighbors in New York City and elsewhere. Makran said that in election in India and places like that, it's 65% average, while in New York State, it's 10 to 15%. And in America, it's so low. That's how folks like Nikki Haley become governor and then move on to higher things. Jonathan says that wrote an article about Pinchot for Milford magazine. Cindy says Sean is an amazing historian, and our mayor doesn't get better than that. And just more and more comments coming in. Tim is learning so much about Milford's history tonight, which is great. And Daryl says he had Mayor de Blasio visit him this week at Richmond Hill. He came through to talk about the census. Interesting. And my mother is wishing Rose a happy birthday from her. And just so many comments. And Sree, don't forget our Mini Cooper road trip to Tim Sohn territory in Pennsylvania. We were in Honesdale in 2 Octobers ago. I don't know how far that is from where you are.
Not far.
Yeah. Cindy says we don't even have a hospital. Great leadership from the mayor, Dr. Menon, and council. We are so lucky, so generous to provide those supplies to Milford businesses. And we're just so many comments coming in. I'm having trouble keeping up. And Cindy's telling us where you are, 15 to 45 minutes from New York and 45 minutes in New Jersey and close to an hour in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. What is the cultural scene like in Milford? We heard a little bit about that already. Big fan of independent music and small theater. And Mark is a dear friend of the show's watching in Durham, North Carolina. And Cindy says, this is what Sean is so great at, bringing things together. And that's certainly happening. Daryl's talking about a Facebook Live show that's going to come up that people can see. And then Ed is here. Ed Weschler says, how much I didn't know. And I remember Sean. And do you know Edward Betancourt?
The name is familiar.
Okay. Late 80s and early 90s. Good to see him, Jonathan. So maybe later on you guys can connect. Vandana says you can read an excerpt from the book here on pause, which Mayor Strub founded. So that's he's talking about that. Run for Congress. You are always sharp, says Ed. Paul is complaining a little bit about some of the tech stuff, and we apologize. Sometimes you don't know Friday night how people are using the technology, and so that happens. Gunsham says good morning, and thank you for the mention, says Tim. So many great comments. Paul says, can you talk a bit about the Zero Project and how it relates to police reform and the Black Lives Matter movement? Thank you, Paul. Explain what Zero or Zero Project, how do you even pronounce it, please?
Zeroproject.com, and we are Zero Project is particularly known for combating HIV criminalization, but we're increasing now, part of this broader movement around reform of the criminal justice system and decarceration. We're now part of a coalition called Health, Not Prisons. But there's information at zeroproject.com. Thank you, Paul.
And thank you for that. Ghansham's watching from Nepal. I gather you've not been to Nepal, but I know people would welcome you there. And Edward says, good to see you, Sean, after all these decades. Isn't that amazing? And Amy Aram is here because Tim tagged her, and she says hello as well. And Roy says, good day from Thailand, Sean.
Roy, oh my gosh. Hey, Roy, how are you?
Wait, you know Roy?
Yes, I do.
Roy works in the UN system in Bangkok. Dear friend, former New Yorker, lived in Mumbai, now lives in Bangkok. Great friend, and you guys know each other. That's amazing. Roy knows everybody, but I'm learning that Sean Strub knows everybody as well. So we've got to let you go. But before you go, I want you to just reflect on the moment we're in today, please. I know some of this has been touched upon. We lived through the AIDS crisis, but we didn't all live through it. It affected people who were gay. It affected people who had certain conditions, certain ways in which it was transmitted. As you said, we knew how it worked after we found out, and people learned to then ignore it. Right? They could say, "This is not me." Right? I don't have these conditions, or I'm not. I don't engage in unsafe sex. Like, there was a feeling about that, and it slowly. The crisis never went away, but the urgency went away. And please correct me if you disagree with any of this. And
the urgency.
Sorry, please.
Because the urgency went away for some.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm sorry. That's what I mean. Mainstream America didn't pay attention enough. I mean, I was surprised to learn ACT UP didn't start till 87, because in my mind, ACT UP was so big and so activist that I thought it was like 85, 86. So to say from 81 to 87, and anyone who hasn't seen it should see the movie and read the book and the band played on. Amazing. And I know that Sean will have his own take on the accuracy of the story. But to me, as an outsider, I learned so much from that book and that movie. A comment on that first, please.
So, well, if I could, because I know we're near the end, I want to make a comment. You asked about sort of this moment and this time. And I want to take it sort of beyond the epidemic to really a time of, a lot of people are frightened. We have an intense polarization and anger. They just sort of feel a free-floating anger in America right now. And a world that once looked to us as a leader in so many ways in human rights that is disappointed in us. And I after Trump was elected, and a lot of us were so depressed and disillusioned, and how could this have happened, and so on. I heard Gloria Steinem. She came to visit Milford and spoke at our Readers and Writers Festival. And she had a message and a way of looking at it that gave me some real hope. And I want to share it. She compared this moment in our country right now to the country, the real heart and soul of the country, being like a person in an abusive relationship that's trying to get out. It's trying to get out. And the most dangerous time for a person in an abusive relationship is when they're trying to leave their abuser. That's the most dangerous time. And the abuser is not just Donald Trump, but it's a patriarchy. It is an out-of-control capitalism that has lost any sort of concern for humanity. That is the abuser. And we as a country are struggling to get away from that abuser. And as dangerous as the time we are in right now, what is on the other side of that when we do is something that is full of hope and opportunity and something that we want to leave to future generations. So I really do think we are in a dangerous moment, but I also think we're in a moment that's very close to tremendous structural and systemic and cultural change in America for the good.
Thank you. That is a hopeful message. I want to show you that dichotomy and that opportunity in today's New York Times. One of the things we do is we read the New York Times out loud, as I was saying. It's every Sunday we do that. But here's the front page of the New York Times. You can see here, virus wipes out 5 years of economic growth. Tragic, right? This means millions of people unemployed, underemployed, and in great pain. But also on the front page, I don't know if I can even bring it close enough to you. It says Mars bound with helicopter. In the middle of this, NASA's Perseverance rover lifted off with its own 4-pound experimental Mars copter on board. Like, I didn't even know that happened, right? Like, this is of everything happening. And we shouldn't forget that when the Civil War was going on, there were still things being done by the president and Abraham Lincoln, who Did you know was a Republican? It's shocking that he was Republican. People did not. No, I'm kidding. Every few days, President Trump tells us that he was Republican because he just found out, unlike the rest of us. But people can do things during the war, during the war. But our problem, Sean, is that we're not treating this as a war, or we're in the middle of a war where our own leadership is fighting us because of misinformation. As you said, the importance of getting accurate information out, and we're failing at that. Sean, a final thought from you, and then we'll let you go.
Thank you. And Jonathan, thank you for introducing me to Sree and this show. It's a privilege to be here. And thanks to Tim and Laura and Cindy and others I know who tuned in. I appreciate it so much.
Nikhil says, great to see Sean. We met in Milford not too long ago. Roy is asking a whole question about your work and so inspiring. Any plans for a new documentary about the urgency of the work going forward? And Edward says, oh boy, I remember ACT UP. I agree. And he says, I agree, but Trump is likely to steal the election. We joked about it all this time, but yesterday, what does he say? We should maybe consider delaying it. Fortunately, it's in Congress's hands, but voting matters. I think the fact that Sean is sitting here as mayor tells you that in a small town, he won by, I forget, 50, 70, or 100 votes, something like, only 500 people voted, but it made a difference. Every vote counts, folks. Do not give up, and please vote, and tell your family and friends to register and vote. And Sean, thank you very much. We hope we can meet in person in New York or in Milford, Pennsylvania.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. What a show. What a evening. I am tired on a Friday, but excited by the words of Sean to think about what is happening in this country and what the hope is and where we go from here. And I'm very grateful to Jonathan Boorstein, our dear friend who has watched for 142 episodes, who arranged this whole thing, helped produce it, helped host it. And he does, by the way, help as a co-producer of another show, which I want to tell you about right now. Tomorrow, you should all watch as Jonathan serves as co-producer of the Spinach Social Hour. Let's talk photography and social media. Stefan Kaplan hosts this. Students of the Fashion Institute of Technology, 5 of Stefan's students are going to discuss their work, and you can see all their handles and everything. Please check out the Spinach Social Hour. I know you will enjoy that. And a reminder of other shows we have coming up this weekend. So that's on Saturday. But before that, we have a special show. Instead of a 9 p.m. show, we have a 9 a.m. show tomorrow. So a few hours from now, Saturday, 9 a.m. Charles Cunnan Carroll, PhD, is with us, author of The Inventor in You, a step-by-step guide to your first invention, holder of more than 70 patents, and my New Jersey godfather. And he is amazing. You're going to learn so much from him. Even if you're not an inventor, I promise you he'll give you new ideas on how to think about the future and how to do new and interesting things. So that's at 9 a.m. tomorrow. And then 8:30 a.m. Sunday is our weekly New York Times read-along. Our guest is Matt Goldman, New York Times bestselling author and Emmy Award-winning TV writer. Credits include Seinfeld, Ellen, and The New Adventures of Old Christine. You may know that as the show that Julia Louis-Dreyfus did from Seinfeld before she did Veep, the runaway hit. Huge Seinfeld fan here. I'm going to track down all the lines that he wrote and resist saying them all back to him. So please join us 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday as we talk about that. And then at 11 a.m. Eastern is She's on Call. Sundays at 11, our friends Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Marina Kurian, 2 surgeons, interview other doctors and tell you the truth about medicine. Sunday, August 2nd, Dr. Benjamin Chang, hand surgery, and Dr. Claudette Lajam is orthopedics. And Dr. Chang was one of the first people, if not the first person, to do a hand surgery transplant, a hand transplant. So he'll hear all about that. Before we go, we have 2 things we need to do. We'll be thanking our sponsors. And before that, I'll be saying their names. You know, for if you watch the show, that we talked to Kimberly Crenshaw. And Kimberly, the Columbia professor who coined the term intersectionality 30 years ago, I asked her, what can we do as allies of the African American community? She said one thing: say their names. We asked Sunny Slaughter, who is an activist and businesswoman and a business leader in Washington, D.C., what can we do? And she said, don't ask your Black friend, what can you do to help? She said, ask yourself, what have you been doing? And one of the things we're proud of on this show is that we have been, unlike a lot of other places where as soon as the protest started with the George Floyd death, the George Floyd killing, they suddenly started putting African American faces on the air. We've been interviewing African Americans, as we have people of all kinds, from the very beginning of this show, 142 episodes ago. And we're proud of that work, and we want to continue. We're looking for your guest ideas, speaker suggestions, sponsorship suggestions, theme suggestions. Please write to me. My email address is right here, sree@sree.net. And let's now read their names and say their names. This is how we were saying their names through this Titus Kaffir cover, very poignant cover of a mother and child snatched away. On the right is a even more haunting picture to me of Larcenia Floyd with her son, George, as a young boy. She would die 2 years almost to the day that he would be killed on the streets of Minneapolis. They're now buried next to each other in Houston. We're now going to say their names through the Say Her Name campaign. Rehajan and others have asked us to read their names and say her names from the Say Her Name report. As you can see, Breonna Taylor killed by police in her bed, March 13, 2020. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you have seen and know these names? I reckon that most of you will be like me. You do not know most of these names, and I will read them now. As always, please tag and share this with your friends. We believe this is an important task, and we must do this as often as we can. Breonna Taylor, Tatiana Jefferson, Charlena Siobhan Lyles, Corinne Gaines, India Kager, Sandra Bland, Alexia Christian, Maya Hall, Megan Hockaday, Janisha Fonville, Natasha McKenna, Tanisha Anderson, Aura Rosser, Shanique Proctor, Michelle Cousseau, Pearlie Golden, Gabriela Navarez, Yvette Smith. Before I read that second column, the same question to you. How many names have you recognized already? How many of these names will you recognize? Renisha McBride, Miriam Carey, Chaim Livingston, Kayla Moore, Shelley Fry, Melissa Williams, Shalena Weldon, Alicia Thomas, Chantel Davis, Charmel Edwards, Rekia Boyd, Cherise Francis, Ayana Stanley Jones, Tarika Wilson, Catherine Johnston, Alberta Spruyel, Kendra James, Latanya Haggerty, Margaret Laverne Mitchell, Taisha Miller, Danette Daniels, Frankie Ann Perkins, Sanji Taylor, and Eleanor Bumpers. Say her name, say their names. Pay attention to what's happening, folks, whether it's in your city or in Portland, where we went twice on 2 straight Mondays to hear from people about what's happening there directly. So much going on, and we have to pay attention. And as we said with Sean, vote. Everyone must vote. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for supporting us. A big thanks to all our sponsors and supporters. We want to thank our friends who make this all possible, including our 2 great producers, Rose Horowitz 31 on Twitter and Vandana Menon on Twitter, today with an assist from Jonathan Boorstein, man of many hats and great writer himself. And you can find him on Instagram and Twitter and everywhere else. We're looking for speaker suggestions and sponsorships. We've had more than 1 million viewers and 100 million social impressions, 260 guests, 148 of them women, 53 cities, 15 countries, and the chief scientist of the WHO. We're coming up on episode 150, folks. What should we do? Give us suggestions. Give us ideas. We want to hear from you what we can do for our 150th anniversary. Not 150th anniversary, 150th day of shows. That would mean 5 months of shows. It is staggering to think about the pain, the job loss, the medical crises in this country that we have not responded to properly as a nation. You remember the story of Richard Reed, the shoe bomber? No one died as he lit his shoe on fire, thank God. And it changed the entire protocol of this country. Take off your shoes at the airport, no problem. People grumbled, but they did it. They were forced to do it. Everyone did it. For one man, no deaths. Now 150,000 people have died. And here we are in this country and how we're responding to the crisis. A shame is the only way I can describe that. And so upsetting. We want to thank our other sponsors. Nunbelievable.com, 20% off with the code SREE, S-R-E-E. Divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each box of handcrafted cookies provides 2 meals to those in need. Please check out nunbelievable.com. Divinely delicious cookies on a mission, 20% off with the code SREE. And here is our final sponsor.
Hotstar Premiere Nights. Watch the year's biggest blockbusters streaming straight to your screen, exclusively on Hotstar.
What if one day you find a bag full of cash and you're faced with a dilemma to take it or not? Would you take it? Watch Loot Case, premiering today and streaming now exclusively on Hotstar. Check out hotstar.com/US at Hotstar USA. Loot Case. You don't want to miss it. The biggest blockbusters straight to your screen from hotstar.com/US. Thank you all, everyone, for being here, for supporting us. We're so grateful. We want your feedback. We want to work with you. We want your ideas. So many different people watching. Paul says, thanks, Sree. I say thank you, Paul. Edward says, Sean, call MSNBC for a spot. Your voice matters. Stefan says, breaking social media news. Trump says on Air Force One to reporters that he's going to ban TikTok. I know I had seen that he was trying to get ByteDance, the Chinese company, to sell, and Microsoft was going to buy it. Let's see what happens. Excellent, says Roy Wadia, Sree, and hey, Paul Knox. And Stefan says, Tim says, Stefan show rocks. So great to see you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. We will see you bright and early tomorrow morning, live or later for a recording. Our special guest is Dr. Charles Cunnan-Carroll, author of The Inventor in You, a step-by-step guide to your first invention, holder of more than 70 patents, and my New Jersey godfather. 9 a.m. Eastern for episode 143. You don't want to miss it. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you soon. Please email me. Please connect. We'd love to talk. And also want to show you one last thing. We have a nice, easy way to find me when we have stories, when we're live on the air. This is a WhatsApp alert, not a WhatsApp group. So just hold up your phone right now and join me every time that I'm live. I'll send you a little ping so that you know I'm live. So this is on WhatsApp, or email me and I'll add you to my WhatsApp group. We'd love to have you in that way too. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you soon.